Lovely. Oh no. He moves out of the way. Oh. Is that working? I'm pretty sure it is. Whatever. I guess. Okay. Everything seems to be a-okay. Ho ho ho! Ho ho! Okay, whatever, I guess. Fun, fun, fun. Wait a minute. Right. I guess I probably should try to review some of this quickly before I move on. I guess. I don't really know, to be honest. I guess it doesn't really matter. It's only my lonesome self for for probably for all of this, honestly. Can I will mention? There we go. Okay. Okay. Let's read through this, and hopefully I don't lose my throat again. How should I go about doing this? Ah! Oh my goodness. I guess none of this really matters in the grand scheme of things, but it's certainly a thing, I guess. Put that there. Oh, I guess that's done. I guess I should do that first. You know, I've always wondered where would this type of stream even go. I mean, I've been putting it in entertainment since I guess I don't know. You could say it's entertaining in the manner of speaking. But I don't know where it would go. Broad entertainment, even though ostensibly perhaps not the most entertaining if you really think about it. But I'll let this sit for about 10 minutes, I guess. What is the... Okay. Let's see. How does this look so far? As I often like to do at the start and or end, here is a little, let's say, behind the scenes information about the nature of these upcoming videos. I suppose there should be no surprise, but I suppose it should be no surprise, but once again, I once again originally intended to only make 1 or 2 videos about my chosen subject. However, after getting a taste of how much information there actually was about the Slaughterhouse 9, I decided that a series of videos about the various lineups I've had over the years, plus one about miscellaneous, let's say, add-ons they've had, would be a better way to organize all of said information. That said, the videos will still be fairly long. The videos will still be long. That said, the videos will still be long. Release. That said, the videos will still be long. That really is something. Really, I wonder. I wonder if it says something about me then. That said, the videos will still be long. I wonder. I really do wonder. That said, the videos will still be long. That said, the videos will still be long. Perhaps that said, even after Right. As I blah blah blah. Plus one about miscellaneous. Plus one about miscellaneous. Let's say add-ons if had would be a better way to organize all of said information. That said, even after dividing them up. That said, even after dividing them up, I still foresee the videos being long. Which will certainly be fun to record audio for later. Which will certainly be fun to record audio for. When I get around to doing that. When I get around to doing that. That said, even after dividing them up, I still foresee the videos being exceptionally long, which will certainly be fun to record. Fun to record audio for when I get around to it. Anyway, regardless of all that, beginning with the general who and what, as it were. First, in terms of the basics, they were an S-class rated warning group of 9 supervillains based in North America. Second, for a variety of reasons, often death, there were not always 9 members present within said group. Neither were they always the same exact 9 members. Though, as an extension of that, while the max number of quote-unquote official members was, 9, later in its lifespan, they did have some, let's call them secondary powered members, who will be elaborated on in a later video. Finally, their action plan, I suppose. Anyway, finally, their driving motivation was, plainly put, to cause chaos and havoc wherever they went. Now, for this part, now, for this part on recruitment, I will mention that the following recruitment process likely came into fruition after Jack/Slash took over. Since, from my understanding, King, the original leader, recruited with a strong reliance on his power, specifically. Since, from my understanding, King, the original leader, recruited with a strong reliance on his power. With a strong reliance on his power specifically. More on that later. Anyway. Now, for this part on recruitment, I will mention that the following recruitment process likely came into fruition after Jack/Slash took over. Since, from my understanding, King, the original leader, recruited with a strong reliance on his power specifically. More on that later. Right. on that later. Right. While I doubt the 9 had a definitive procedure for recruitment, given changing circumstances and moods and, well, the chaotic nature of the 9 themselves, the following is a general way the 9 seem to have recruited based on what we see within the story. First, each of the 9 nominated someone they would like to initiate into the group. Though, to reference my doubt about them not having concrete recruitment methods, it is possible for someone to confront the 9 and nominate themselves, if one so desired, for whatever reason. Second, each member can choose to visit or alternatively observe their chosen target before formal recruitment begins. Finally, after an indeterminate amount of time, each of the 9 individually tests every nominated Finally, after an indeterminate amount of time, each of the 9 individually tests every nominated individual. Finally, after an indeterminate amount of time, each of the 9 individually tests. Finally, after an indeterminate amount of time, each of the 9 individually tests. Finally, after an indeterminate amount of time, each of the 9 individually individually tests every nominated every nominee. Individually tests every nominee. Some members always give the same general test, and others mix it up every time. Some members may even forego a test altogether, but from what I could find, that was a relatively rare occurrence. Interestingly, the recruits did not need to pass every test to move on to the next test. In fact, Jack himself said that no one had ever passed all of them. Evidently, even with that in mind, depending on which test it was, failure still carried with it a high potential of death, or worse. So it is still evidently in the best interest of the nominees to strive to succeed. Okay. Before I move on to Cape content, I have a few more things to mention. First of all, if more than one candidate manages to survive until the end, the 9 forced them to fight to the death to determine the ultimate winner. Second, from what I was able to gather, it seems as though when the 9 were more in a rush and or desperate for members, they may have been a bit laxer when it came to recruitment. Perhaps they gave abridged versions of their tests, or perhaps they saved their tests for later. Evidently, those speculations are just that, speculation. Certainly, given what we do know, we can make informed guesses all we want on what they would potentially do. But given what I said earlier, those guesses are based on a recruitment process that was possibly just one of many. But to get back on topic, the most prominent examples we do have of them recruiting members quickly recruiting members was vague on the details. We don't know how long each recruitment took, nor how long it was between each recruitment, let alone how they went about their tests while being hunted. Additionally, to my knowledge, all the examples of quote-unquote normal recruitment that we have extant information on only ever involved filling one vacant spot. So it's also uncertain on whether the nine would even recruit more than one person from the same place or pool of candidates. Anyway, finally, while I do not have a ton of examples to give, when I can, I will mention the type of test a given Solar House 9 member liked to give. How long has this been steeping? I have no idea. Oh, whatever. I'll leave it there for more. King was the original member of the Slaughterhouse 9, and since there was only ever one other leader besides him, before I elaborate on his power, I'll begin and state that under him the 9 were described more as a brute squad. I don't exactly know what that means, but I can only infer that in this and then that in I don't know exactly what that means, but I can only infer that in that era. I don't exactly know what that means, but I can only infer that I don't exactly know what that means, but I can only infer that in this. I can infer that. I don't exactly know what that means, but I can only infer that at this point, the 9 probably. I don't exactly know what that means, but I can only infer that during his time, the 9 probably had a bigger emphasis on collateral damage, plain rudder, and quote-unquote in-your-face confrontations with Hero. To put it another way, at this point they probably were already known as a group of powered circles that, while formidable, were only just that. Wherever they went, they likely were labeled a high-risk threat, but perhaps not an S-class one yet. Besides maybe Grey Boy. Did not quite have the same presence and weight to their existence compared to how they later were under Jack Slash. Don't get me wrong, they were still a scary group to encounter given the capes they had, but to me, since they could be quickly and simply described as a brute squad, that gave me the impression of them not being much other than that in the grand scheme of things. They gave me the impression of them not being much other than that in the grand scheme of things. They were a group of villains. Strong, yes. them not being much other than that in the grand scheme of things. They were... They were kings as opposed to... They were kings, Slaughterhouse. Distinctly different from Jack's Slaughterhouse. That said, they were kings, Slaughterhouse. Distinctly different from Jack's Slaughterhouse. That said, on that note, on that note, that said, while on that note, on the Jack, they were still much the same group. That said, on the Jack, they were still much the same group, but perhaps more psychotic, and deranged. They more or less probably did do much of the same activities. However, with Jack, there came a distinct shift in methodology, in presentation, in public perception. From what I was able to surmise, to Jack, what they did had a sicker and more twisted spin. To Jack, things became much more like some sort of player game. To Jack, the Slaughterhouse were not just not a scare group in Worm. No, they became something to be dreaded. Something that even those other scare groups feared, or at the very least took serious pause at. On that note, it's quite funny. This session is supposed to be about King. It's technically about King. On that note, it's quite fun. It's quite funny. This session is technically about King, yet I've talked quite a bit more about Jack Slash so far. And the thing about that is, well, Jack Slash did overshadow King in the end. A lot of them may have started it all, but Jack was the one that made the 9 what they came to be known as. Though it does help that Jack was the leader far longer than King ever was. Anyway... fuck. I got more than a little sidetracked. So, King. He was a brute and a striker, though the nature of the latter also made him sort of a master, too. But not really. More on that in a bit. Right. I'll begin with the brute details since there really isn't much to say. Basically, he had enhanced strength and durability. As far as I know, there isn't much, if any, information relating to the extent in which he was enhanced. From an in perspective, that makes up degree of sense, considering considering when people think about of king. Considering sense. Considering when people think of king, they think of his striker. They more so think of his striker power, which in itself sort of considering when people think of king, they more so think of his striker power, which in itself sort of masked any enhanced durability he had. I think of his striker power. King himself was previously was previously a star ally, so depending on how enhanced his strength was, it is more than possible for his allied feats to be related to him being abnormally strong. Not quite superhumans. Example being, example being, I can see there being a gray area on whether, let's say, well, that's all for those powers. So moving on. King's striker power allowed him to transfer any physical wounds he sustained to people he touched. King's striker power allowed him to transfer any physical wounds he sustained to people. King's striker power allowed him to transfer any physical wounds he sustained. King's striker power allowed him to transfer any physical wounds he sustained to people. Allowed him to transfer any physical wounds he sustained to people he touched within the last 24 hours. Said power worked instantly. A simple pat was all it took. Said power worked instantly. He did not. Let's say. Said power worked instantly. He did not need it to He did not need it to. Said power worked instantly. He did not need it to. He did not need it to. It did not need to, for example. It did not need to, for example, quote unquote, soak into a person before taking effect. Additionally, anyone affected by his power also instantly. Additionally, anyone affected by his power instantly knew that. Additionally, anyone affected by his power instantly knew that something was done to them. The source of the wounds themselves were also a conscious one, though King himself did not necessarily need to actively will his wounds away every time. His power was reflexive in nature too, so as far as I could tell, as long as he himself or his body were aware of a physical wound, said wound would be sent away. Now, before I continue on to ways one could have theoretically fought him, there are several details I want to highlight. First, I could not find a limit on how many victims, or pawns as you like to call them, he could be linked to. Second, now that you know what his power was, you can see what I meant by a king relying on his power to recruit, and how that could classify him as a pseudo-master. Third, I will clarify that King's power more specifically transfers away physical harm. So it is a little unclear what, aside from more obvious bodily injuries, counts as harm. Grey Boy's time looping registered as harm, making King immune, but that doesn't really help in determining if things like fatigue or sickness count. Maybe yes, maybe no. There are arguments for both, but you can decide for yourself. Finally, I am uncertain on the nature of the transfer, as in, it's unclear to me if the full brunt of the damage was sent to one person at a time, or if the damage was dispersed between all his, or if the damage was evenly dispersed between all his available pawns. Well, when it comes to ways to fight him, or more specifically kill him in the case of the following, they are all relatively straightforward, all considered. The most brute force method, with little regard for life, was to just wound him over and over until he runs out of pawns. Though if you are one of said pawns and or care about the lives of said pawns / yourself, another method that could bypass his power involves killing him in his sleep, with the caveat that he needed to be in a deep sleep, REM sleep. Otherwise, his body was still aware enough to reactively transfer damage dealt to him. Additionally, even if the latter condition was met, the kill needed to be quick because, as one can imagine, it won't take long. It won't take much time for King and his body to be sufficiently aware again. The next method would be the destruction of the Corona Palentia. Though, given King's power, for the latter to feasibly work, those involved would likely need a degree of precision and timing that may fall into superhuman territory. Okay. The next two methods one could consider rely more on parahuman powers. The next two methods one could consider rely more on parahuman powers, at least more than the previous one could theoretically need. Anyway, The first method that could probably work involves something or someone that cancels out powers. I say probably mainly because I'm unsure if such a thing falls under what King's power considered as physical harm. After all, Scalar's power had a wide range on what it considered After all, Scalar's power had a wide range on what it considered a bug. More so, in a more meta way, I can see a shard, especially King's, interpreting something like power cancelling or suppression as a sort of quote-unquote physical harm. But I can also concede that it may not. But I can... But I can see... But I can also see... But I can also see it not... But I can also see it not considering the latter. More so in the more meta way, I can see a shard, especially King's, interpreting something like power cancelling or suppression as a sort of physical harm. But I can also see it not considering the latter as physical harm. But I can also see it not concerning the latter as physical harm. Nevertheless, while I did not find evidence of this way not working, I also didn't find anything about this way working either, so take all that as you will. Regardless, the other method, needing pairwinds, involves powers that, how do I say this, manipulate the fabric of reality and or dimensions, I suppose. I know Foil's power worked, and I think Scrub's power would too, given the nature of it. I would also say maybe clock blockers, but that one I am more unsure about, for a variety of reasons. But in this moment, the most prominent reason is that... But that one I am more unsure about, for a variety of reasons. But in this moment, the most prominent reason is that I simply don't recall enough about Clock's power. In use of Clock's power. Now, the last method technically does not need pyramid assistance. Now, the last method technically does and does not need. The last method technically does not need pyramid assistance. Said method is to use containment foam. It has been shown that the latter does suddenly immobilize him. In that same vein of thought, theoretically, it may also be possible to trap him with more normal materials and their methods. One that comes to mind is using immense weight, such as dropping a building on him. That may not harm him, but it may trap him. However, as I stated earlier, we don't know how enhanced his strength was, so I can't really make definitive guesses on what standard materials could be used or how much weight it would take to pin him. Plus, if it is crushing weight, that will harm the pawns. Assuming one cares about them in the given scenario. But besides all that, containment foam was designed by Dragon to contain all the strongest and fastest villains, so it's not the best frame of reference to go off of. When it comes to finding more normal. So it's not the best frame of reference when it comes to go off. So it's not the best frame of reference to go off of when it comes to finding more normal. When it comes to more normal ways and trap him. Plus. So it's perhaps not. So it's perhaps not. So it's perhaps not the best frame of reference to go off of when it comes to finding more normal ways. So it's perhaps not the best frame of reference to go off of when I'm trying to find more no. When trying to find more. So it's perhaps not the best frame of reference to go off of when trying to find more normal. It's perhaps not the best frame of reference to go off. So it's perhaps not the best frame of reference to go off of when so it's perhaps not the best. But it's like it was. So it's perhaps not the best. when coming up with more no. So it's perhaps not the best frame of reference to go off of when coming up with more normal ways to trap king. Before I move on to the next member, I'll state that king's setup counters are I'll say that King's set of counters may be more difficult than that compared to other members. Not because they're necessarily the most difficult to do, but because King, and more generally the leader of the star sign, is often likely to be with other members of the nine. Generally, out of all members, and leader would be the one less likely to act alone. Though, from what I could piece together about his death, King didn't have any other allies with him at the time. Granted, he probably thought the people who killed him were his allies before they, well, weren't. That or he was confident he could take them, or that or he was that confident. That or he's that confident that he could take them out. That or he's That or he was confident. That or he was confident they on his own. So, yeah. That or he was confident that he could take them on his own. That or he was confident that he could take them on his own. So, yeah. Well, all that took longer than I thought it would, but on to Screamer. They were a shaker and a stranger, and the power they had was the ability to produce sounds. Producible sounds can be as loud as a scream, evidently, but also as quiet as a whisper, and everything in between. Said sounds could also be projected in around a mile radius, or I guess around 1.5 kilometers. I'm sorry what those sounds felt like. They were described as if the sounds were right next to the recipient. Note. When close, felt like. In terms of what those sounds felt like, when close, they were described as if the sounds were right next to the recipient. No, Screamer could also translate sounds in a way that felt like said sounds were in your head, though I will mention that the latter may just be another way to describe a sound being quote unquote right next to you. After all, how close is something quote unquote right next to you when you think about it? And how close does one need to be for a voice or a sound to feel like it is in your head? Alright, with quick basics, well, let's move on. First, besides their more overt and perhaps more well-known method of deafening people through screams, Screamer was more than capable of enacting tactics subtler in nature, such as engaging in psychological warfare, exerting mental pressure upon enemies through auditory distractions, among other things. Well, on that though, I will mention that I do not know the full extent of what sound she could utilize. However, from a purely personal perspective, I assume her capabilities were at least akin to birds that mimic sounds. I say that because Skimmer could modify their bass voice to the extent that they could outright emulate the voices of others, which, as one can imagine, allowed them an additional avenue to disorient people's minds. Granted, besides the presumably base requirement of actually knowing what their chosen person sounded like, if Skimmer had any chance of sowing any real discord and confusion within their foes, to pull off a convincing performance, they also seem to have needed a degree of understanding, or at least general knowledge of, on how the person they were mimicking emotionally responded to things. Additionally, while I am uncertain about validity, it also seemed like knowledge on how a target emotionally responded helped. Additionally, while I'm uncertain about validity, it did also seem like knowledge on how a target emotionally responded. It did also seem like knowledge on how helps me. It did. While I'm uncertain about validity, it also seemed like knowledge on how a target emotionally responded It also seemed like knowledge on how It also seemed like knowledge on how a target. It also seemed like knowledge on how a target. It also seemed like knowledge. Set up the time to make their voices. Give me a second. Oh my god. Now, even with a convincing act, there were still several ways the mimic person themselves could signal that they were being impersonated. So how does Screamer get around that issue? How does Screamer get around that issue? So how does Screamer get around those issues? However, I'll clarify that Skimmer's power did extend beyond producing sounds. As you may have already figured out, it is more accurate to describe their ability as sound manipulation. With that in mind, Skimmer could cut off verbal signaling by putting people on mute, in a manner of speaking. They basically dampened someone to the point that even shouting was as quiet as barely a whisper. They could even make things sound. They could even make things sound like they were being filtered through something, such as making a voice sound like it was coming out of a radio. Okay, up to this. Okay, up to this point, pretty quick. Okay, to be quick. A sensible assumption one could make the console screamer is to block out the sounds in some way. Fortunately. Unfortunately, the issue with that was how Screamer did not strictly need air vibrations to transmit sounds. It has been noted that if need be, Screamer could use the vibrations of someone's bones to generate words. Which, to refer back to something I said earlier, would the notion that Screamer could potentially use ear bones to form sounds. It's not difficult to conclude how Screamer may have generated sounds that felt like they were in your head. I suppose it goes without saying, but Screamer does have the capabilities. Does have the capability. I suppose it goes without saying, but Screamer is capable of fulfilling a more support-oriented role. The thought may have already been ruminating in your head, but yes, Screamer can and did use their ability for the purpose of communication. Sure, a Miles' column isn't that big of a range, but having a method to convey information that was harder to intercept was still nevertheless useful. Plus, to add on to that, Screamer themselves did not need to worry too much about being overheard because they could whisper the information they were conveying. Then, if need be, have the information be heard at normal volume on the other side. Oh, and I'll also add that Screamer did seem able to initiate too. Oh, and I'll also add that Screamer did seem able to initiate. However, I will once again note that this may not have been the norm due to circumstances that I won't get into, but suffice to say, they may have had help from others of a similar power set. Conversely, I also may have misinterpreted exactly what was happening in the scene I'm referring to. Said scene is in Sting 26.6, in case you were curious. Right, the last thing I wanted to note related to all of this was how precise Screamer could be with their power. Based on all the scenes I have read, Screamer could, as one can imagine, project their voice in a wide area for all to hear. But alternatively, they were also more than capable of manipulating sounds in a more specific area, localizing the effects to the point where they could target specific individuals. Now, before I move on to the next member, I'll make note of here that information relating to members. Now, before I move on to the next member, I'll make note of it here. The information relating to members long dead by the time of the main story may not be fully accurate, or more specifically, true to form, to what several members may have been capable of when they were part of this other, when they were when they were initially a part of the Slaughterhouse 9. I realized that I should do away with the previous voice, but given the way I like to structure these videos and the nature of these videos. But once again, to minimize spoilers, I will say that at some point copies of 9 members are created. However, to varying extents, their personalities, capabilities, and general way the said copies acted in combat were influenced by speculation, hearsay, and stories about them. More so, said copies have been described as having incomplete memories along with patchwork personalities and personal histories. But to focus on, I think. But to focus back on campus specifically, I think it is pertinent to mention that But to focus back on Kipio specific, I think it's pertinent to mention that the relevant copies sometimes may have been weaker compared to the original selves. There isn't much dark information to support that statement, but given all the other things I have noted, there is there is basis in the notion that copy members did not have there is basis in the notion that copy members did not have the same level of experience and knowledge about their powers compared to their original selves. So from now on, whenever you see whatever I end up choosing to denote members whose information is mostly based on the copy, keep in mind that said members may have been more formidable or alternatively, there may have been details about their powers that said members took to their graves. For example, this will be later in the video, but Harbinger's section would probably be quite different if we did not know. Harbinger's section would probably be quite different if we did not have an interlude from their perspective, especially considering the next best sources we have in regards to what their power parameters could be or descriptions on how Kirby's fought, aiding the older Harbinger chose to share and whatever figures in the PRT had on Harbinger. Conversely, you can also state that other sections would have been different if we had an interlude. Conversely, you can also state that other sections would have been different if we had an interlude. What the heck am I going? Conversely, you can also say that previous sections would have been different. members. Adversely, you can also say that previous sections would have been different if we had an interlude from those members' perspectives. Of course, you could also say the previous sentence would have been different if we had. Right. With that informed bit of information done, let's move on to Harbinger. He was a thinker, and as far as the purity could tell, his power was a hyper-awareness of space and of his own body movements. Now, that was not his actual power. His steward power ability allowed him to see the numbers, the math, that govern the world, with said math appearing in front of him in the air. However, I will say, given the information the purity was able to realistically acquire at the time, their guess was not a bad one, since, as you will see, the nature of Harbinger's power did give him, in a manner of speaking, an increased awareness of the space around him and of his body's movement in said space. Though, perhaps not in the way the purity may have assumed. Anyway, since Harbinger's power isn't quite as showy, as it were, as other powers, I'll give a bit of warning here and say that things may be a bit listy in this upcoming section, as in since Harbinger's power is predominantly mental in nature and more so widely applicable to a large variety of situations. I will, perhaps more than any other programming I have done before, be spending quite a large slice of time simply going through said applications. Though, evidently, since he was a member of the Slaughterhouse Line, there will be more than a little time dedicated to how he fought. However, that will be for later. At the current moment, I will begin by elaborating further on how Harbinger himself experienced his power. I think a pertinent initial thing to note is that, as far as I could tell, his power was not always on, or at the very least was not always as present. From what I was able to discern, to manifest the numbers, he needed to pause and concentrate. Then, once they were out, he seemed to be able to set how visible said numbers were. Now, since as previously noted, his power had such a wide range of applications, one can imagine that the math he ended up seeing varied greatly from situation to situation. As a bit goofy as it is, I suppose the various images and videos depicting someone surrounded by various math equations are decent enough ways so one could visualize Harbinger's power. Though, in contrary to the general spirit of said images and videos, Harbinger generally did not seem too distressed about all the math he needed to sort through and understand. Assumingly, considering Harbinger triggered at a very young age, that understanding of the numbers likely came in no small part from his shard. Though, I suppose if one so wants to. Though, I suppose if one so desires, you so desires. No, I suppose if one so desires, you could chalk it up to him being a particularly bright child. All that said, while the following example likely isn't the definitive way he may have experienced his powers, a way that has been shown is how his real-time senses seem to have lagged behind the speed in which his power did the math. He already knew what was projected to happen, but what he was still perceiving had yet to line up, making what was still happening feel slow. Now, I will add a little asterisk to that, since the above was based on a scene where he was just twirling a pen. And in that case, the only variables his power had to consider were things like velocity, general trajectory, and the rotation of said pen. I was going to imagine with increased variables and accomplishing that slow motion effect. that slow motion effect may not be as that slow motion effect may not be as prevalent. In fact, to give a point of comparison, in a more high-speed combat scenario, we were told how the mat he saw sang in his ears, how it rang along his skin. Further still, he also described it as if he was tasting the mathematical notations, as if he was swimming in a cold, clear, precise, organized outline of the world around him. Right. Right. With that done, I suppose I will continue on to that previously mentioned list of applications. I generally won't be taking too much time to elaborate on them, since there really isn't too much to say past he could do so and so with his power. Though obviously when I eventually begin talking about some of his more physical related feats, I probably will have more to say due to how said feats overlap and play into each other. Nevertheless, the first thing I want to bring up is his manipulation of the global economy. I generally won't say too much since there really isn't too much to say past he could do so. Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. what can I have on the side while I do this stuff? Right, with that done, I suppose I will continue on to that. Right, with that done, let's get into the... Right, with that done, let's get into the... With that done, let's get into the list of publications. Right, with that done, let's get on to the list of applications. Starting with one that has a bit more substance. Right. Ooh. Hmm. Uh. Hmm. Okay, whatever. The first thing, more substance. The first thing I want to bring up is his manipulation of the global economy. Obviously, that is more than a bit unbelievable, but remember, Endborn due to parahumans and Endbringers and Endbringers and others and things, the overall scale of the world economy is smaller than ours. More so, at least from my layman knowledge, considering how much of our current world systems are controlled and are influenced by a relative few. It's not too much of a stretch to believe that someone with a superhuman capability can essentially see the flow of our economic could from the shadows puppeteer things to go a certain way. That would be a bit probably helped too. Granted, at that point he wasn't hovering anymore, but that's besides the point. But that's beside the point. That said, while still on the topic of economics and whatnot, another more blatant way he uses his ability was by being the supervillain banker. One that has at least a little substance. Oh. I can't really say much if someone. I can't really say much if someone wanted to officially. I can't really say much, but if someone wanted. Ugh. Oops. Ooh, gotta do something. Doesn't look like it. Okay. Food is prepped for later. Oh ho ho. Okay, anyway. I want to bring blah blah blah. Now, moving away from all that, let us go through the quicker things. 1. Given enough information, Harper could formulate a fairly accurate count. 2. He seemed able to calculate how valuable a person was. I don't know what type of value was applied, but I suppose he could have been calculating the clock. There you go. A good architect. Made him a good architect and demolitionist. On one hand, he could design an extremely structurally sound structure, and on the other, sound structure, and on the other. On one hand, he could design something extremely structurally sound, and on the other, he could see the very faults of a structure and engage in precise, controlled demolition. And on the other hand, he could see the very faults of a structure and engage in finally, at least for this part, his power also made him very perceptive, and as such he was effective at fighting even without sight. Oh no, I'm not going to. I'm going to shift back to more. I'm going to. On that note, let's shift back to more physical. And then let's shift back to more physical applications. On that note, let's shift back to more physical applications. Mostly things that relate to combat, but some more generally applicable things. I guess a prudent first thing to mention is that while Harper is effective at range and at melee distance, he is better at the former. That said, I will begin with how he fought in closer ranges. I think the most important thing to notice first is that with his lack of enhanced strength, Right. Uh, that said, that will be, I guess, a prudent first thing to mention is that, well, I guess a prudent first thing to mention is that while Harvard is effective at range and at melee, he is better at the former. That said, I will begin. That said, I will begin with the ladder first. I think the most important thing to note is that with his lack of enhanced strength, whenever he needed to incapacitate, not kill someone, he relied more on holds that disallowed his presumably stronger opponents from using their physical. Their stronger that disallowed his presumably stronger opponent from using their full physical power. No examples of this were when he put Lung and one of Bitch's dogs in the hold. Notable examples of this were when he put Lung and one of Bitch's dogs in the hold. Notable example of this were when he put Lung where when he put Lung and one of his this were when he put Lung and one of Bitch's dogs in immobilizing holds. Granted, Lung wasn't significantly powered up, and the dog, from my recollection, wasn't amped up by Bitch. Obviously, these holds are not the best. After all, there are numerous situations where they would be less effective or altogether ineffective. But Harbinger is certainly smart enough to know when to use them. Now, under the idea that Harbinger had a certain degree of understanding of his opponent, if applicable, he was able to execute. If applicable, he was able to execute precise dodges to the point that a given hit could and would miss him by the smallest of margins. In fact, even when against foil, someone with a similar ability that allowed them to execute their own accurate shots, he was still just the same able to dodge said shots. Probably should have mentioned this earlier, but the last bit of information I will give is that while putting someone in a hold, I will give is that while putting someone in a hold is the last bit of information I will give is that while putting someone in a hold is one way he can close, he could also target pressure points and or break bones. No. But even that. Well, last point I will give is that while putting information into someone in the hold is one way he could close, he could also target pressure points and or break bones. But even that is But even that. Even those methods are generally more. Even those methods are generally more suited. Normal. Ordinary. Oh gosh. Now aside, there are two more things I want to quickly note. Okay then, broadly speaking, Harbinger was... okay then, well... Okay. Okay then, like I said. Harbinger was better at range because it... Okay, like I said, Harbinger was better at range. Harbinger was... like... Okay then, like I said earlier, Harbinger was better at range. Okay then, like I said earlier, Harbinger was better at range. Because, like I said, Harbinger was better at range because it gave him more angles of attack. I don't know. Oh gosh. Oops. Okay, broadly speaking, Harbinger was better. Broadly speaking, Harbinger was better at range. At the range because it gave him more angles of attack. Okay, broadly speaking, Harbinger was better at the range because it gave him more angles. Okay. since it allowed him to gather more information, which gave him a better read on things, which made him better at anticipating attacks and the ability to add some finesse in his ways of attack, such as ricocheting bullets and projectiles or doing long-range disarms and disables. I probably could go on and on about the bunch of ways he could, and I probably could find more examples there. But given all the other stuff I've said about Harbin's Fire, along with the stuff in this part, I think he could die now. Okay, well. Okay then. It allowed him more. It allowed him to gather more information, which gave him better, which made him better. I probably could go on about what we fought, and I probably could find more direct examples of how we fought, but given all the other stuff I've said about I think you get the idea. That aside, there are two more things I want to quickly note. First, his power gave him highly efficient movement. First, his power allowed him to enact highly efficient movement. Notably, he could quickly identify foot and handholds when climbing, to the point that he could climb a building at a speed similar to how fast he would be on flat ground. To the point that he could climb a building at a speed similar to how fast he would be on flat ground. From an aspect he looked as if he was almost floating. Second, he was capable of using basically anything as a weapon, from the normal like pistols and snipers to the comparatively less normal like pens. Well, let's have another. So moving on. Hmm. Hmm. Oops. Ow. Hmm. Hmm. Breed was a master. Haha. He would have the most great song. Where does that would go? After eating. Breed was a master. He had the ability to create small life forms that would grow and become more dangerous over time after eating. Hmm. 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 Set off first we go to 3 main. Is Said life forms would go through 3 main stages. Responsive. One through 3. Said life forms would go through 3 main stages. For simplicity's sake, I'll call them stages. Said life forms would go through 3. Said life forms would go through 3 main stages. Said life forms would go. Bleh, bleh. Breed was a master. He had the ability to create small life forms that would grow and become more dangerous over time. Said life forms would go to 3 mains. Hmm. 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 He had the ability to create small arms that would go and become. Said life forms would go to 3 mains of. Hmm. 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 Okay. For the sake of something. I'll just have the stage 1, 2, and 3. How creative. How creative. Well. Oh no, I forgot. I have to cook something. Okay. Okay. Oh no.